Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tony Whitbeck. I'm the CEO with Advisor Legacy. And with me today is Todd Dory, who is our Vice President. Welcome to today's presentation. As you can see, the title is It's Time to Sell Your Practice. And Todd's going to take you through the majority of today's content, but I am going to set the stage for today's call. But before I do that, I want to just take care of some housekeeping things. First of all of the telephone lines are muted, so you will not be able to speak during the presentation. We will have a Q&A session after we finish the presentation. So what I would encourage you to do is go to the Q&A section in your control panel and type in the questions as they arise throughout the presentation so that we'll have a number of questions queued up when the presentation is over, and we don't have to wait for people to type in their questions. So with that, I'm going to just give you a brief overview of Advisor Legacy and the services that we offer. We really are a full service M&A firm that focuses on the financial services industry. And it doesn't really matter what stage of your career you're in, whether you're building your practice, whether you're living and protecting the practice, or whether you're looking to leave a legacy. We have services that we can offer in each of those areas. So you'll see for those that are building their business, we offer executive coaching and practice management. We offer buying opportunities because we have sellers that have engaged us to help them find buyers. We offer both legal and lending support, and we offer buy-side deal support. For those that are in the living and protecting stage of their career, we do business valuations. In fact, we do a lot of business valuations and have won numerous industry awards. We do probably 300 to 400 valuations every year for both advisors and lenders in our space. We do continuity planning, which is protecting your practice in the event of a death or disability. And we also can help you create an entity structure and an operating agreement if you're looking to run your business using a legal entity. And then when you're at that point of your career where you're looking to transition and leave a legacy, we can help you find a buyer for your practice if you don't have one. If you do have one, we can do sell-side deal support where we're working on your behalf with the buyer. We do succession planning, both internal and external. And succession planning is different than continuity planning. Succession planning is planning for the retirement, where continuity planning is protecting against death or disability. And then we offer legal support as well on the sell side of things. So as I mentioned, there's really not a whole lot that we don't do in our industry, and it doesn't really matter what stage of your career you're in. We have services that we can offer you. All right, so let's get into today's presentation. And I have a few slides that I'm going to cover to set the stage, and then I'm going to turn it over to Todd. He'll take you through the rest of the presentation, and then at the end, we'll do the Q&A. And remember to please type your questions in as we go, so we have some queued up at the end. We have found that most financial advisors have a difficult time deciding to retire. In fact, there's a phenomenon. When we ask someone when they're going to retire, almost always they say in about 5 years. And the problem with that is the people that we asked 5 years ago when they're going to retire, they said 5 years, and we ask them again and they say in about 5 years. So why is that? And my conclusion is that 5 years is not too far away, that you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not too close either, where you have to perhaps feel the anxiety of making that change and stop doing what you've been doing all your life and move into retirement. So that 5-year time frame seems to be the comfort zone for most people. What's scary, though, is that many financial advisors don't prepare or plan for these events. So when you look at these statistics, for advisors that are less than 5 years away from retirement, 59% don't know who's going to buy their practice. It's going to be someone on the outside. They don't have someone internal to do a next gen transition. But again, less than 5 years from retirement, nearly 60% don't know who's going to buy their practice. 30%, they do know who it is. It's going to be someone that they know, but it's not a partner in their practice. And then the remaining 11%, it's going to be an outside buyer, or they're just going to walk away and the firm will reassign the clients, or maybe a family member or junior employee. So unfortunately, financial advisors are generally pretty unprepared for a major event in their life, which is transitioning their practice and transitioning their own life into retirement. So we asked ourselves, why don't advisors plan for retirement? And we came up with 4 things. One is they're unable to let go of work goals. Now, most financial advisors are pretty competitive and they have goals every year that they set, and they want to hit those goals and they want to go out on a high. And oftentimes they want to do it just one more year to see if they can hit that goal. The second is, as people start living longer, they don't believe that age really corresponds to their readiness to retire. But a lot has changed in our industry: compliance, technology, just the way we do business. And oftentimes when people age, they start to slow down and stop keeping up with the current trends and changes. The third is, and I think this is one of the biggest ones, they haven't set alternative goals. What I mean by that is, many of you may have been doing this for your, obviously your entire adult life. It could be 40 years. And if you don't have any hobbies or other interests that you can retire to, really in your mind, you're just saying you're retiring from something you've done all your life, and you have nothing else to do but what you're used to. So it's critical to have other interests and other goals that you want to retire to. And then finally, advisors have a hard time finding someone that they trust that could be their successor. Many of our clients have become friends and family. And the number one thing that advisors are looking for when selling their practice is an advisor that's going to take care of their clients just like they did, or even better. And advisors struggle with finding who that person is going to be. What's interesting is that while many advisors haven't done well at preparing themselves for retirement, about 50% of the retirements are unplanned. And this is where the advisor is being forced to sell due to, let's say, an unforeseen illness, a death or divorce, or parent illness, where they have to sell their business to spend more time with the sick family member. So those are unfortunate situations. So 50% generally are planned, but 50% are not planned. And that's where some real trouble can come in if you don't have a continuity plan and you don't have a succession plan put in place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd, and he's going to take us through the remainder of the content. Again, type in your questions as you have them. Todd?
Thank you, Tony, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. As Tony pointed out in the introduction, we've really found that the decision to sell your planning practice for most advisors is largely an emotional decision. And like most emotional decisions, we tend to put them off. And there's a lot of justifications. We'll talk a little bit about some of that today, that people use to be on the 5-year path, as Tony pointed out. And many advisors have been saying 5 years for the last 10 years, and as Tony said, they'll be saying 5 years if we were to ask them today. Unfortunately, that emotional mindset and those justifications to delay retirement are really contrary to making a good business decision, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The fact is that we are in what is currently the best market for practice sales that we have seen to date, and we've been doing this for quite a number of years. And there's some potential risks coming around the corner, which we're going to talk about in the 5 reasons that you might consider selling sooner than later. That could put, the sale of the practice at risk, or certainly the monetization of the equity that you've built up over the years at risk. And for most advisors, the value of their practice is their largest personal asset, or certainly one of the larger personal assets. The average valuation today is around 3 million. So let's jump into the information here. The first thing that you see on the slide is probably the most common justification that we hear of, and that's the idea that, well, if I monetize my equity today, I'll be getting less than if I just stay on a few more years, and that's why it keeps getting pushed back 5 years and then another 5 years. There's a lot of problems and poor assumptions that go along with this justification, though. First, the practice value is often underestimated. People kind of had this idea of, 2 times revenue, but depending on how you sell the practice, you could get over 3 times revenue for your practice today in the market that we're in. So value can be, extremely underestimated, especially for those who don't have a current valuation completed for their practice. Continued revenue is overestimated often. What we see with advisors who are really in that 5 year from retirement group is often they're not, pushing the pedal too hard in terms of marketing and growth. Their client base is getting older. We'll talk more about that later. And oftentimes, when we do the valuations for those folks, we see, a decline and not growing revenue and asset base. And then other issues come up with this justification, like, for example, they often thinking of the revenue over a specific period of time, but not accounting for the expenses of operating the practice. So right off the top, you would take, say 40%, which is about the average expense ratio, depending on the size of practice, out of this revenue model, which would be 200,000 a year out. The other thing that they don't account for is the difference in tax allocation. The proceeds of a sale are taxed as goodwill, which is long-term capital gains, whereas ongoing revenue is obviously taxed as ordinary income at a much higher tax rate. So as you can see, a lot of this justification is really overly simplified, not, taking all of the real facts into account. And it really is just that. It's a justification to think, oh, I should just keep working and then I could sell my practice rather than being ready to retire and monetizing the equity at its peak. The other dynamic that we see very common for people in again, delaying their retirement has to do with identifying the peak of equity. Most businesses will experience a peak of equity for the owner, probably with the exception of being teams or generational practices. Don't necessarily do that. But for most, they will experience a peak of equity. The dynamics of that peak, as you can see on the slide here, and this is based on our valuation data for advisors who are at least 60 years old and at least 15 years of service, they tend to start working less hours around that range of age and time frame. And that's a reasonable expectation. You've pushed really hard for many, many years, probably 20 to 30 years. And when you get into the last phase of your career, it makes sense to want to slow down a bit. And so we generally see them working less hours. Along with that goes, a decrease in marketing. Most of those advisors would tell us they don't do any marketing, and the referrals that they get from clients is only from existing clients. So with that decrease in hours, you'll see a typical following decrease in revenue. At the same time, there's a couple of negative correlations that are starting to increase, one of them being the age of the clients. If you're not bringing in a younger client group to replace your older clients, then your existing client group will age a year every year. It's funny how that works. The other negative correlation is that the expenses of the practice will tend to increase over time, even when the revenue is decreasing. So that has a negative impact on profitability and a negative impact on the value of the practice. So all of those things combined, as you can see in the dotted line there, create a peak of equity at a certain point and then a continual decline in the equity over time. Unfortunately, again, many advisors make the emotional decision to either ignore this peak or they don't even identify it. And by the way, our valuation process can help you identify when your existing client group will peak in equity. So those are just a couple of the justifications and the dynamics that support those justifications that advisors are using to either delay their retirement or not really give it much thought at all. There's also some pending changes in the industry and really in business in general that could put the monetization of equity and also the demand for the sale of your practice at risk over the next 5 years. And this is why we think for many people in the 5-year group, they should consider selling sooner than later. So the first of those items, and I would say probably the most impactful of them, while they're all fairly impactful, I think this is the big one, has to do with supply and demand. There's a lot of data out there, and it's not all consistent about the age of advisors, but I think it's pretty clear if you look at the various data sources that as many as 40% of the current advisor population is going to retire in the next 5 years. In a 10-year time frame, I've seen reports that show as many as 100,000 advisors retiring that time frame. What you also have happening at the same time is the group of advisors who have been in the buyer's seat, and those are the advisors largely between 40 and 60, are now starting to move into the seller's seat. So you're going to have less buyers, more sellers, and the next generation of advisors is quite small. Estimates are that there are less than 30% of advisors who are under 40 years of age. So you can see this dynamic shifting fairly significantly, and the main shift will happen over the next 5 years. We've been in a very, very strong seller's market, and we're still in a strong seller's market. The demand is quite high. And for every practice, that's listed for sale, if people pursue a listing type of sale, we'll get probably 30 interested parties or better. So the demand is quite strong still, but this could shift fairly quickly as we see that, that shift in the amount of people selling, a simultaneous decrease in the amount of people who are available to buy practices. The other dynamic that we're seeing there is a lot of the larger practices, there's been so much consolidation in the industry, are starting to feel the pain of growth. Oftentimes their profitability isn't what they expected it to be. They're shouldering a lot of debt from acquisitions over time, and probably, there comes a point where they can't take on more debt. And some of them might pull themselves out of the buyer's seat just because of other dynamics like that, not having to do with them moving into the seller's seat. So supply and demand, certainly one of the big ticket items in terms of the future threat to equity and also your ability to sell your practice. The next item is really a positive, and that is that currently prices are very high. The premiums that we've seen are the best that we've seen to date. Depending on how you sell, we see premiums as high as 40% above valuation. And it's really a combination of two main buckets. One, the quality of practices has increased substantially. So the average AUM is higher, fee-based revenue ratios are higher, profitability has improved over the last 5 years. Almost all the key metrics that we measure in the valuation are better than they were 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. So the quality has gone up. At the same time, we've seen pretty substantial increases in revenue, and a substantial amount of demand on the buyer side. So if you put all those things together, it really equates to a perfect storm of very, very strong valuations and very strong price when the practice actually sold. As you can see here with this data, and this is a little bit dated, but pretty close. The average valuation, 2.6 million. I think it's about 2.8 today, but it varies. That average size practice being sold, 151 million in AUM, just over a million in revenue. And the average multiple of gross revenue or gross GDC is 2.35. The top 20% multiple 2.53. And again, depending on how you sell, multiples can go up into the 3 range as well. So the takeaway here is that currently, we know the market we're in. We know valuations are strong. We know demand is strong. In the future, that becomes an unknown. So this is again, recognizing the peak of equity, the peak of demand is often, the best strategy for when you monetize equity. The other item that has really impacted the marketplace for practice sales, I don't think this is something that people really give much thought to, is that buyers' access to capital or lending, if you will, to fund acquisitions has never been better. While interest rates have been increased as of late, hasn't even stopped the demand for practice sales and the prices people are willing to pay. And this is a big reason for that. So most deals today are bank financed. What that means for the seller is they're going to get the majority of the sale price paid to them at closing. Often that's 85% of the sale price paid in a lump sum at closing. And they're only holding a small note of 20 to 15% or so. You can even find buyers who are willing to inject cash into deals where the seller is holding no note with a combination of buyer cash and bank financing. But certainly the ability to fund these deals and to pay back the note over 10 years versus the traditional seller financing of a 5-year note has really enhanced the buyer's ability to offer premium price. And it allows their cash flow to be appropriate while doing so. It used to be, I don't know how many years ago it was, 10 years or so, maybe a little longer, where all deals were seller financed. There was no bank financing. But certainly this being available and this dynamic has increased practice sales monetization of equity. Tony mentioned that a lot of times, people are getting frustrated with, the changes in the industry and so forth, and that results in why people are selling. And you might be interested to know that the top 3 reasons that people sell, and this is anecdotal based on our clients over the years, the number 1 reason is burnout. So advisors are, just not willing to go through all the changes of, technology, virtual meetings, compliance. Wearing all the hats of a business owner is problematic for a lot of people. And they get to the point where they either don't want to do it at all anymore, or they just want to get back to servicing clients and not having to do all those other tasks that a practice demands of you. The number 2 reason people sell has to do with life events. And Tony pointed out that a large number of sales are due to life events. Usually it's health related, but it could also be a family related life event. And then you have to get all the way down to number 3 for a planned retirement. So number 3 reason people sell is a planned retirement. But getting back to this slide, the changes in the industry have really been accelerated over the last 5 years ago. And I can't even imagine how much that will change, will continue to accelerate with artificial intelligence and other things that are, coming into our industry are already here. And those changes are really, moving at such a pace, it's incredible. So, if you're a solo practitioner or a small team practice, trying to keep up with all the changes, it's extremely difficult. And again, we hear it from many of our clients who make the decision to sell, that is the primary reason. The reason they got into the practice in the first place is they have a passion for serving clients, probably still continue to have that passion, but not the passion for doing all the other stuff it takes to run the practice. The last of the 5 items, and this is probably up there with the supply and demand dynamic, is the clients are aging. We have a very specific analysis of this. It's called a max val predictor in our valuation. It's a proprietary analysis that looks at the age of the existing client group and can predict when that client group will actually peak in asset accumulation and revenue. What we found when we built that model is that the tipping point of client growth is the average age of 70. So when clients up to 70, they have variable positive growth rates. When they reach 70, those growth rates become negative. And of course, the further away you get from 70, the more negative those growth rates become. So we're actually able to analyze that. But the important thing that we have seen, and increasingly so over time, is that the practices that we do run through that analysis, the majority of them are peaking in the next 2 to 3 years from the valuation date. And that's the average result. So it's actually unusual that we see an existing client group that would continue to grow past, say, 3 to 5 years, and very rare that they would continue to grow closer to the 10-year point in the model that we use. So what that means is that, unless you're in a growth mode of, acquiring new clients, and again, most people are not when they're closer to retiring, that the age of their clients alone is going to impact their revenue, their profitability, and obviously the equity of the practice when it comes time to sell. A very old group is a difficult sale because there's just not any growth left for the buyer, and it's hard for them to make that investment knowing that they're going to be buying a depreciating asset. So client age, definitely probably the number 2 factor that we've looked at today that could impact your practice in the very near future for most advisors. So those are the items we wanted to point out. Again, many people have delayed retirement. They're using justifications that aren't exactly accurate in doing so, largely because they're just not prepared to make the emotional decision to sell. And there's a lot of other things that could be coming down the pipeline as a function of time that could put their equity and their ability to sell at risk. So we certainly suggest that you consider options. We find probably the best starting point for most advisors, while we're certainly willing to schedule time with anyone on this call today to discuss options. Evaluation is normally the best starting point. So as Tony mentioned, we provide many valuations to the industry. We have a very easy process of completing the valuation. And the most important part of our deliverable is that we spend 45 minutes going through it with you. So we really want to look at, when it comes to succession, what is the timing of your succession? What does the valuation tell us? Is it peaking next year, the year after? How does that impact your readiness to retire? It's definitely possible that you can sell the equity without retiring. We have a lot of what we call sell and stay strategies, which is another great option if someone's recognizing that the equity is peaking, but they're really not ready to step away from client service. They can sell the equity, continue to work on behalf of the buyer, and continue to do what they probably enjoy the most, which is servicing clients. So you can see here our valuation process, pretty straightforward. You go to our website, the drop down of services takes you to the valuation service. You purchase the valuation online with your credit card. The retail price is $12.95. Many advisors, probably most of you on this call, are with partner firms of ours, and you get a $300 discount by selecting that firm when checking out. You automatically, get the instructions emailed to you. We have people who can help you if you have any questions about the data collection. You submit the data, we complete the valuation within 10 to 15 business days. Usually it's quicker than that. And then when you get the deliverable, we schedule the one-on-one consultation to go through the results with you. And really that, the consultation part I really find is the most valuable, where we can talk about your goals, what the valuation is telling us in terms of you're achieving those goals, and really drill down on the details of you helping you achieve those goals. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tony, and we'll open it up to some of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd, for that great information. So this last slide here, you can see if you go to our website, Todd mentioned this, but here's a visual for you. It's advisorlegacy.com, and then you can go to take action, and the very first option is purchase an advisor business valuation, and that'll get the process started. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to some questions, and I was monitoring the question line, and I don't see any yet. So hopefully we have some questions from our group. So now would be the time to go to the control panel for Zoom and go to the Q&A section and then type in your questions. Todd, while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, do you want to explain the difference to our viewers between a closed sale and an open market sale?
Sure. So a closed deal is really described as, two advisors have found each other to buy and sell. And it's normally based on a long-term relationship between those advisors. So the seller has known the buyer for a number of years. They've had discussions about, when I'm ready to sell, you'll be ready to buy, and so forth. That's largely how the majority of deals in our industry are done, and that's based on, again, a long-term relationship. We have services to help the two people put the deal together in terms of valuations, negotiations, consulting, legal support, and transition support as well. An open market sale is where you don't have a buyer identified and we're listing your practice on a listing platform. And most of the time, at least for our open market sales, they're limited to the specific broker dealer, so it's not being repapered, or in the RIA space, most of those sales are limited, the listing is limited to other RIA practices. So in that case, we're putting together a listing profile, we're publishing it. There's, many advisors who are pursuing the sale. We're vetting that large group continually down to a smaller group. Tends to be very competitive among the buyer candidates, and open market sales is where the monetization of equity is definitely the highest. Premiums in that space can be as high as 40% above valuation, and also you get the benefit of vetting, many qualified practices to choose the best possible fit for your practice and your clients.
So Todd, we got a question from one of our viewers. It says, can you describe the legal team behind the sales process when 50 states have 50 different laws in some scenarios?
Definitely that is the case, but it tends to be pretty straightforward when it comes to asset purchase agreements. I won't say that we've done deals in every state, but probably awful close if not. And we work with one specific law firm for the asset purchase agreements. They've completed literally hundreds of them all across the country. So there's no limitation on, a sale being in a specific state. They do their research to make sure that those things are covered. I think we've probably covered most states when it comes to that. But the terms of the deal, the structure of the agreements and so forth, tends to be pretty straightforward. We try to keep things as simple as possible. And really there's no limitations on where we can handle a sale.
Todd, we have another question. This appears to be an advisor at Ameriprise. It says the multiples within Ameriprise has been higher in the past than with other firms. Is that still what we're seeing?
I would say, and we track this, so we know specifically what they are. Ameriprise is certainly one of the stronger markets for practice sales. And I think that comes from it being a competitive marketplace and a very well-informed marketplace compared to some other broker-dealer platforms. So I wouldn't dispute that fact. I think there is some hearsay about results that may be a little exaggerated compared to what the actual results are. We have a white paper that we've distributed this year that actually outlines the results of sales and dynamics of why the results are what they are in terms of multiples versus expectations of multiples.
Well, thank you, Todd. It looks like that's it for our questions. So great questions from the group. We appreciate that. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to what we have to say. And hopefully you got some value out of today's content. So I would encourage you to go to our website at advisorlegacy.com. We actually have a free online practice valuation estimator. We don't recommend you use that for anything other than just to get a ballpark idea as to what your practice might be worth. Well, we fully endorse doing a formal valuation because there's so many things that go into play. And this will really help you plan if you're looking to sell your practice. It's going to help you plan your own retirement, knowing what that value is and how does that impact your ability to retire now. So evaluation is a great place to start, as Todd pointed out. So thanks again for joining us. Hopefully you'll tune in for our next webinar. We usually do them once or twice a month. So keep your eye out for the next invitation. Thank you.